So there's one other office that we need to talk about that we see in Scripture that churches are to have as part of the leaders in the body. Last video we talked about the office of the elder, and the elder is the pastors of the church. They're the ones who are responsible for the ministry of the word and prayer and for the shepherding care of the flock that God has appointed to a local church. These are, like I said last week, elders are pastors, pastors are elders. It's one in the same, essentially, throughout the New Testament. But there is another office that's mentioned in the New Testament, again, in several different places. The most prominent places that we see them are in Acts chapter 6 and in 2 Timothy chapter 3. And this is the office of deacon. Now, deacons are not the same as elders. And one of the things that I know is going to come up almost immediately when I use the word deacon is you are probably going to be affected by whatever the history or the context of where you grew up and what kind of church environment you grew up in. That's going to maybe give you an immediate thought about what a deacon is. So, for example, I grew up in a Church of Christ down in southern Indiana. It was a very small church, but I didn't know that the church even had elders. However, I knew that we had deacons because there were several of them and they did all kinds of stuff in the church. So deacons are a prominent office, and depending on what your background is, you may have seen deacons do work in a variety of different capacities. But let me remind you, what we need to do is we've got to go to the Scriptures and say, what does the New Testament teach us about the office of deacon? What are these people supposed to do? Who are they? How do we select them? So we need to go to the Scriptures. And again, we're going to go deep into what a deacon is. Specifically, we'll go and look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse by verse, through the qualifications of a deacon. But let me just give you the snapshot briefly about what we think a deacon is supposed to be and how they serve in the church. So as I said, a deacon and elder is not the same thing. Elders are tasked with the spiritual responsibility and accountability for leading the church by the teaching of the word, preaching of the word, and shepherding through pastoral ministry, prayer, and shepherding people by the word. So that is the primary distinguishing characteristic that an elder pastor has that a deacon doesn't have, is the teaching authority through the word. So what does a deacon do then? Well, we could simplify this by pointing you to Acts chapter 6. I think that gives a good picture of what deacons were chosen and selected to do. And if you go to Acts chapter 6, what you see is a scene where the young early church was forming and developing, but the apostles, who are in this instance represent the pastors and elders of the church, they weren't able to meet all of the tangible needs of the people in the body at that time. So specifically, there were people who needed a special attention, like widows, who weren't being given the proper attention and care. Specifically, they weren't getting any food. So the church came together and called out from amongst the church a group of people to serve as deacons. Now, these deacons were primarily tasked with meeting those tangible needs of the body. Now, throughout the New Testament, we see little pictures of deacons serving in different capacities, and they're almost always associated with the idea of being servants in the church. So deacons they're not the same as a church board. They're not the same as a governing board. They're not a team of elders or pastors. Deacons are really servants in the church who help to minister to the body and meet the physical and tangible needs of the body. You might consider this something like mercy ministries. So here at Crossview, our goal is to develop a team of deacons who will help us to meet the physical, tangible needs of the body. And you might see this play out in practical ways like visits to people who need help at home with maybe home care. Consider potentially the elderly or the handicapped who need help to just care for themselves or care for their homes. Situations like that might be a situation where a deacon could step in and help. Another situation that is really common around Crossview is when a family brings in a new child, or when they have a baby, and what we love to do is support those families by providing meal trains and going to visit them and help to babysit and watch the kids. And these are the kinds of needs that maybe a deacon could also serve to meet. So a deacon would help meet those tangible needs by saying, hey, we're going to put together a meal train, and we're going to take food to this family with a newborn, and we're going to pray over them and provide them with meals and help. Something that might come up, but not maybe as frequently, is the need to care for orphans and widows. That's also a need where we can use deacon support to help meet the tangible needs of people in the body. So those are the basic essentials of what a deacon is doing. It's around the mercy ministries and serving and meeting the needs of the church. I just want to emphasize before we close and continue on with another video would be that the deacons and elders are not the same thing. The elders have a different kind of responsibility than the deacons. Deacons aren't junior elders. They're not elders in training. They're a completely and entirely different office. Deacons are not pastors, elders. They're not bishops. None of those titles fit for a deacon. It is its own unique office. So I challenge you to consider reading through some of the different scriptures where we see deacons mentioned. They're throughout the New Testament. You can specifically look in 2 Timothy 3, or 1 Timothy chapter 3, and in Acts chapter 6. Read in those sections, learn about deacons, start to understand their qualifications, and in upcoming videos we'll do more deep diving into who these people are and what kind of role they play in the church.